Jorge Beltrao is an 18-year-old school student in London. This September, he was all set to head off for his first year at university.
I was planning to go to Nottingham University and study philosophy, politics and economics.
Then the coronavirus pandemic hit, and Georgie changed his mind about going. With all the social distancing and lockdown measures in place, he wasn't sure he was going to get the full university experience.
Yeah, it was really hard actually to not go to university. I'd hear stories from my sister who's graduated, and she'd tell me about all the great times she had, especially the first year, like Freshers' Week and all. I mean, it sounds unimportant, but actually the social is actually probably a big part of uni, because you're making all friends and all. But I don't want to pay the money and for it to be not the full experience sort of thing. I mean, it sounds unimportant compared to the rest of the sort of coronavirus consequences, but it is my future that is going to be impacting.
Georgie's not alone. Zamzam Ibrahim is the head of the UK's National Union of Students.
The commitment to go to university is a huge financial commitment. And so if you're going to make that huge financial commitment, then you need to know what you're getting at the end of it. And that's really what's happening to this cohort of students who are about to step into university and make a huge decision. So yeah, the average deferment is 3% of students that don't actually go on to further education and take a year out. This year, that number is going to go up to 20%, which is huge. It's a significant number. And if anything, I wouldn't be surprised if that number is actually even higher.
Zamzam Ibrahim, and more from her a little later. That potential lack of students this year could have huge financial implications for universities and colleges around the world. In the UK, for example, universities say they expect to lose $8.5 billion in revenues. And in the US, they're warning of a $45 billion loss. But as in other sectors of the economy, the idea of bringing thousands of people together on a university campus is fraught with danger.
We've found that the connections between students are very close, and these small world networks on a college campus really create a fertile social condition for the spread of a disease like the coronavirus.
Kim Weeden is Professor of Sociology at Cornell University in the US. She conducted a study to see how it might fare in the current pandemic.
Even though only 2%, more or less, of Cornell students take a class with any other random student chosen on campus, it only takes 3 degrees of separation, or 3 steps, to reach 92% of other students on campus. So if you think about that, it basically means that if I'm taking a course with one person, and that person is taking a course with a third student, and the third student is taking a course with the 4 students, it's really only 3 steps between me and that 4th student. And you can get 92% of the students on campus connected just through those indirect networks that are created by taking a course together.
And what is it about life on campus that leads to this rate of infection?
I think one of the main challenges that universities are facing is that the same connections that create such a vibrant intellectual environment on college campuses also create the conditions for the spread of a disease.
Like many other universities around the world, Cornell thinks the answer is to offer online courses instead. Classes and lectures by, say, Zoom or some other social media app. How does Professor Kim Weeden feel about that?
There are some instructors who excel at online instruction, and there are some instructors who maybe aren't so good at in-person instruction. Speaking from experience, I just think it's very difficult to read verbal cues from students when you're staring at a screen with, 40 or 50 or 100 Zoom profiles. It's just very difficult to make those connections. And I think that attention spans also wane. It's exhausting, frankly, to stare at a screen and to keep engaged all day. I think it's just a lot easier when you're in a face-to-face setting. I think that students often learn and engage ideas when they talk to each other, and that becomes very difficult in the context of an online educational experience.
Still, that's not stopping universities from trying. Universities like that in Edinburgh, for example, which, like many here in the UK, get a big chunk of their funding from student fees. The rest comes from government grants and other sources. Edinburgh University's principal and vice-chancellor is Professor Peter Mathieson. I started by asking him, what's the atmosphere like on campus at the moment?
It's quiet. I mean, we're allowed to go out for exercise once a day, and I'm sad enough to want to walk around bits of the campus to see how things are. So I quite often use my evening exercise to walk around bits of the campus. And it's certainly not the normal, vibrant place that you'd expect a university campus to be. But we're very confident that we can continue to provide a very high-quality education for students, both national and international.
So a lot of teaching will move online, which takes away that imperative of actually being on campus to experience the university?
Well, I don't entirely agree. I mean, I think some teaching can be delivered face-to-face, probably in small groups. And of course, there's a whole load of the aspects of the university experience which are nothing to do with what goes on in the classroom. So there's a lot of enjoyment of the city, particularly a fantastic city like Edinburgh. There's a lot of social activities, a lot of cultural activities. And we're trying to think of ways that those can still be provided with social distancing and with people's health and safety in mind. So it's not just about the large-scale lectures, which will undoubtedly be changed, but there's a lot of other things which we hope we can provide some continuity so that it won't be exactly the same as before, but it can certainly aim to give people a good all-round student experience.
But are you worried that fewer people will apply to university as a result, and that will have a financial impact?
Yeah, I mean, it's an inevitable concern, and we, like most research-intensive universities, the University of Edinburgh depends upon income particularly from international students, to cross-subsidise some of our other activities, most notably our research. And so if we lose some of that income and we have fewer students than before, our ability to cross-subsidise our other activities is reduced, and we've got to think about ways of mitigating that. And that's why, for example, we've taken the decision to suspend our capital programme, because we want to be sure that we don't take on projects that we can't afford to complete.
Are you concerned, though, that students will want to pay less, that they're going to be saying, well, we're not getting the original university experience, and as a result, we won't want to pay the full fee?
There is a debate about that. The UK government's certainly so far taken the line that they don't expect changes in tuition fee levels. Again, I think if we can offer students a really genuine student experience, I believe that a degree from the University of Edinburgh will be every bit as valuable for this cohort as it has been for the last 400 years. And so they're coming to study at one of the world's great universities, and they'll emerge with a degree which will stand them in very good stead in the future. And I think that is worth the investment. And it's not the case that online education is necessarily cheaper, because doing it to a high standard and producing the right quality materials requires considerable upfront investment. So it's not as if we're saving money in the short term on providing online education, because we're not.
Professor Peter Mathieson of Edinburgh University. And that's the thing, providing high quality education, whether online or in person, is an expensive business. That's why for many universities, international students are key. In the UK, for example, they're charged much higher fees than domestic students. It's a similar picture in places like Australia and New Zealand. Simon Marginson is Professor of Higher Education at the University of Oxford. He says dependence on international students has left some universities financially vulnerable.
In the UK, Australia, New Zealand and a small number of other countries, international students have become integral to the core funding of higher education, especially its research effort. In the case of the UK, it's run education as an export industry, and it's become a very large-scale export industry, altogether generating more than $20 billion a year for the UK.
Those are large numbers, but as a proportion of all the funding that a university, such as the one where you are, the University of Oxford, what proportion is that of the funding that a university of that size needs?
Well, direct fees, tuition payments by international students to universities constitute about $6 billion of that $20 billion figure that I gave you. I mean, the rest of the money is in the spending of international students on housing and entertainment and food and all the other things that international students need to live in the UK. In terms of the level of financial dependence, we think that about 18% of all university funding is coming from international students, or it was before the pandemic began. I can't give you the figure for Oxford, but it's probably higher.
And is it similar in Australia and New Zealand?
Similar in New Zealand. In Australia, the level of dependency is higher. There, it's more like 25% of all university revenues.
Ooh, that's a lot.
It is very high. And there are cases where international students constitute half of the student body. In the United States, it's a lower level of dependence. It's more like 5% of all students overall compared to the 20% here.
So obviously these universities are all looking at this pandemic and thinking, if we can't keep those international students coming, we are really in financial trouble.
Well, I think that sums it up. I think the universities are already anticipating big drops in numbers while the pandemic continues to eat into their capacity to provide face-to-face education. I mean, online education can be very good, but for international students, it's the in-country immersion in, the English language environment, especially if you're coming from a non-English speaking country. Immersion living in the English speaking environment is tremendously formative and helpful in your language ability and your later capacity to work globally in business or in other professional sectors. And the experience of, things like vocational and work experience programs, classes themselves, those things make it more attractive. So online only is less attractive to international students. So I think as a result, we're looking at drops of, perhaps in the next academic year in the Northern Hemisphere, drops of, say, 50 or even 80% in overall.
In terms of numbers of international students? Do you think universities around the world will go bust now as a result, or do you expect to see that?
It's entirely up to the policy government systems around the world. I mean, I think in some countries they'll sustain higher education, like they'll sustain other necessary parts of public provision. In other countries, some universities will go bust.
Just to be clear, when you say that, you mean you think that some governments will step in and make up for the lack of funding from international students?
I can't imagine that, say, the Dutch universities will be allowed to close. I'm quite sure that the Dutch government will sustain them as really central and important institutions in society. There's a consensus in the Netherlands about the importance of universities. It's not a political argument. It's just a social fact that universities are central institutions. I don't detect the same certainty in the English-speaking countries. I think there's a view that universities are just often, special pleaders, out there to try and advance their own position. You can't trust them when they say they need money. They always ask for more money. The pushback is no, make them work harder, make them become more efficient. Maybe they're too dependent on international students. It's their fault. So in that kind of environment, things can go wrong. I mean, we can lose institutions carelessly, perhaps. The strong research universities in the UK are going to see this out, and that's where I currently work. I'm very fortunate. But what I'm aware of is that young people, new researchers, new PhD graduates, promising talent, it's that generation which is at risk. A lot of the best work in universities is done by young researchers. When they've got tremendous energy, new ideas, enthusiasm, there won't be enough opportunities for this generation of doctoral graduates to come into the system and make their contribution.
But are any universities going to come out well from this pandemic?
One of the effects is going to be to strengthen the countries in East Asia, which have now emerged as strong university systems and have also managed the pandemic better than most of the rest of the world. South Korea, China, Singapore, maybe Japan emerge as perhaps stronger destinations for international students than they were. I don't think you're going to get a wholesale movement away from UK, US and Western Europe into East Asia. What you're going to see is a faster rate of growth in East Asia in international student education than in the rest of the world for probably the next 5 years or so. So some rebalancing is going to occur. So there will be three strong zones. There will be the English-speaking world, which will be still the strongest. There will be Western Europe and there will be East Asia.
Professor Simon Marginson from the University of Oxford. What then can universities in the English-speaking world do to convince international and domestic students not to turn their back on going to college this September? Back to Peter Mathieson of Edinburgh University. For someone who has applied to Edinburgh University, got a place, is due to start in September, but is umming and ahhing about it because they're worried about that they're not going to get value for money, that they're not going to go through the usual university experience, that the teaching might. What would you say to reassure them?
I'd encourage them to come. We're listening to their concerns. We're trying to respond to them. We can do everything we can to protect their safety. We can give them the best education we can in what may be quite changing circumstances. But as I said earlier on, I think an Edinburgh degree will remain a very valuable commodity. And I would say also that the alternatives to university don't look attractive, in the sense that people will sometimes defer their studies either to take on jobs or to travel. And clearly taking on jobs is going to be difficult in a worldwide recession, and travel is going to be restricted. So in many ways, I would encourage them to think that they're going to be safe here, they can enjoy their education and they can do well here, and it'll be a very good investment for what will be a changed world for years to come after coronavirus.
Will that convince students, though? A question for Zamzam Ibrahim of the UK's National Students' Union, who we heard from earlier. The coronavirus, it could be with us for a very long time yet, and social distancing may be with us for a very long time yet. Do you think students might just have to get used to the fact that for the foreseeable future, going to university isn't going to be the same experience as it has been? There's going to be less face-to-face teaching, no more Freshers' Week, that kind of thing. Can you see students eventually having to just accept that that is the new reality?
I think students and young people in general are probably like the ones that are like agile and able to adapt to change, right? I don't think students expect to be going back to campus when it's not safe. That's not something that they want. But actually what needs to be made clearer, and I think what they should expect, isn't for them to get poor quality education. That isn't a compromise that any student should ever make, especially the financial commitment that they'll be making. And so there's a role for these universities and also the government to play in ensuring that quality education that all these young people deserve is put in place. I mean, it's clear that we're heading into a recession, right? And we know the only way that we come out of a recession is to reskill and retrain your workers. And so actually education is the answer to solving the issues that are literally coming our way.
But in the meantime, our South London student, Jorge Beltrao, has made other plans.
So my plan next year actually is reapply to Oxford University now, because I've been given time to prepare. But I actually really want to do some work experience at maybe a conservation charity in Africa for maybe a couple of weeks. And also just work for a while, do some work experience maybe involved in politics is one of my interests. But I don't want to be going to university if it's not going to be this full experience, which is universities are probably very angry about. They'll be very upset because we know that they'll be struggling. But once again, we don't want to be going to university out of pity for the university. We want to go for our own futures.
Student Jorge Beltrao. So it looks like tough times ahead for universities, and the question now is which will survive and which won't, and will governments help out? That's it from this edition. Today's producer was Edwin Lane.